All right, so today we are taking a deep dive into The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle.
Okay.
This book, it's all about, well, it's a guide to spiritual enlightenment by mastering being present in the now, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to unpack some of its key insights. And I think most importantly, we're going to figure out how to actually use them in our daily lives.
Yeah, because a lot of people read this and they're like, okay, great, be present,
right.
But how?
Exactly. So, being present, it sounds deceptively simple.
Yes.
But Tolle really reveals just how deeply our minds actually resist it. He argues that, most of us, we're trapped in this constant stream of thoughts about either the past or worries about the future.
Right.
And that's what really keeps us from experiencing true joy.
It's that monkey mind,
Yeah.
Always chattering, always bringing up the past or projecting into the future.
Yeah, and I'm definitely guilty of that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I think we all are. But okay, so how do we actually escape this mental time warp?
Right. Well, Tolle, he starts by emphasizing this idea that you are not your mind. He sees the mind as a tool.
Right.
And like any tool, it can be incredibly useful. But, when it's just running this show unchecked,
right,
it becomes like this dysfunctional chatterbox that just drains our energy and keeps us, from really fully experiencing the present moment.
That's so true. And he has that great analogy where he compares the mind to a dog that's obsessed with chewing on a bone.
Yeah.
But the bone is our problems. He asks, can you be free of your mind whenever you want? And I have to admit, when I read that, I was like, not really.
Right.
Can you?
It's a great question because it makes you really stop and think. Because we do. We get so identified with our thoughts, right? That we forget we even have this power to actually just observe them. Right. To detach from them a little bit. Think about it. If you're constantly replaying a past mistake in your head, or maybe worrying about some future deadline, you're missing out on what's actually happening right now.
Right.
And a lot of times what's happening right now is pretty darn good.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. But what about when what's happening right now is actually kind of painful? How can being present help with that?
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's where Tolle introduces this idea of the pain body, which I think is one of the most fascinating and actually useful ideas in the book.
Yeah.
It's essentially this accumulation of negative emotions, that we all carry around from past experiences. It's almost it's like an entity in itself that kind of wants to stay alive by feeding on more pain.
Wait, so you're saying we have this thing inside of us that actually seeks out suffering?
In a way, yeah. The pain body thrives on negativity. It actually seeks out situations. And even people that will trigger those familiar feelings of pain. For example, if your pain body is rooted in feeling unloved, you might unconsciously attract partners who will kind of reinforce that belief.
Right.
Or even sabotage relationships that have the potential to be really fulfilling.
So we might be unconsciously perpetuating our own suffering.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah. It's kind of unsettling, but it also feels really empowering.
It is empowering.
If we can become aware of this pain body, we can actually start to break free from its grip, right?
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Awareness is a huge first step. But Tolle, he argues that the real key here is to shift our focus from the mind to the present moment.
Right.
He sees the now as the gateway to this deeper dimension of awareness, this place of peace and even joy that exists beyond all that mental chatter.
So it's about learning to quiet the mind and simply be present with what is. I can see how that would be so challenging in our fast-paced world, our hyper-connected world.
It's definitely practice. Doesn't happen overnight. But Tolle offers some practical tools and techniques that I think we can all use, to cultivate this awareness of the present moment.
Right.
It talks about the importance of paying attention to our breath, noticing the sensations in our body, and just simply observing our thoughts without getting carried away by them.
Right. So it's we're training ourselves to become more aware of our inner experience rather than constantly being pulled outwards by distractions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as we cultivate this inner awareness, we become less reactive to our thoughts and our emotions. We start to see them as kind of passing clouds in the sky.
Yeah.
Rather than, getting caught up in the storms they create.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all connects.
Yeah.
So we become aware of the mind, we detach from the pain body, and we shift our focus to the present moment. But Okay, how do we know if we're actually making progress? Is there like a way to tell if we're trapped in that mental time warp, that Tolle talks about?
He offers a really simple criterion. He's like, are you experiencing joy, ease, and lightness in what you're doing?
Mm-hmm.
And if not, chances are you're probably lost in thought.
Yeah.
Reliving the past, worrying about the future.
So if I'm like, stressing over a work project, for example, then I'm not truly present in the moment.
Right. You're letting your mind dictate your experience.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean you have to enjoy every task you do, but even in those challenging situations,
Right.
there's a difference between engaging with the task at hand
Mm-hmm.
and getting swept away by all these anxious thoughts about it.
So it's about finding that space of presence, even in the midst of difficulty.
Exactly. And this connects to another important idea that Tolle presents. He argues that, most of us, we're not actually alternating between consciousness and unconsciousness, but rather between different levels of unconsciousness.
Right. What?
Yeah, so he distinguishes between ordinary unconsciousness,
Yeah.
which is when we're completely absorbed in our thoughts and emotions,
Mm-hmm.
and deep unconsciousness, which is a more acute state of suffering. That arises when our ego is really threatened.
I think I need an example.
Sure. Okay, imagine someone cuts you off in traffic. Your initial reaction might be anger,
Yeah.
frustration.
Yeah.
That's ordinary unconsciousness. You're just reacting automatically
You're right.
without awareness. But if that anger escalates into full-blown road rage, where you're yelling and making gestures, that's a sign that you've dipped into deep unconsciousness. Your ego has been triggered.
Yeah.
And you're completely lost in that emotional reaction.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does this relate to the power of the now?
Because by becoming aware of our thoughts and emotions, right,
Mm-hmm.
we can start to choose how we respond to them.
Right.
Instead of being ruled by our unconscious reactions,
Yeah.
we can create a space for conscious choice.
Yeah.
And that space is the now.
Okay, so the more present we are, the less likely we are to just get swept away by those unconscious reactions.
Exactly. And this brings us to this fascinating anecdote that Tolle shares in the book
Right.
about this Native American chief.
Yeah.
And he observed that white people, they always seem to be seeking something.
Right.
And he wondered what they were searching for. And he concludes, they must be mad.
It's like we're constantly looking for something outside of ourselves to make us happy, when true happiness might actually be found within.
Exactly. And that feeling of constantly seeking,
Yeah.
is what Tolle wants us to overcome by connecting with a deeper dimension within ourselves and something he calls the unmanifested.
The unmanifested. That sounds kind of mysterious. What exactly is that?
Tolle describes it as this formless, timeless God essence
Okay.
that exists within all beings. It's beyond thought, beyond form, beyond the limitations of our ego.
So it's like a spiritual realm that we all have access to, but how do we get there?
Well, Tolle believes that certain practices can act as portals
Okay.
into this realm of the unmanifested.
Okay. Portals into the unmanifested. That sounds pretty intriguing.
Right.
What kind of practices are we talking about here?
Well, one of them is focusing on the inner body.
Okay.
And not just the physical sensations, but that deeper energy field, that kind of permeates our physical form. Tolle suggests that becoming deeply aware of this inner body, it can lead to a pretty profound shift in consciousness.
So instead of solely identifying with our thoughts, we can shift our attention to the felt sense of the body.
Exactly. And another portal is, of course, meditation.
Right.
Tolle, he emphasizes this practice of what he calls cessation of thinking, which, might sound kind of daunting to people who are new to meditation.
Yeah.
But it's really about creating space between our thoughts, allowing the mind to kind of settle into stillness.
Is there a simple way for someone to try this at home? Even if they've never meditated before?
Absolutely. I mean, even something as basic as focusing on your breath for a few minutes each day, it can make a huge difference. Just sit comfortably, close your eyes, and bring your attention to the natural rhythm of your breath.
Okay.
And when thoughts arise, just acknowledge them gently and then redirect your focus back to your breath.
That sounds doable. What other portals does Tolle discuss?
Well, he talks about awareness of space and silence, not just external silence, but that inner stillness,
Yeah.
that exists beneath that constant chatter of the mind. He even mentions conscious death as a portal.
Okay, hold on. Conscious death. That sounds pretty intense. What exactly does he mean by that?
He's not talking about physically dying, but rather about the death of the ego. like the shedding of our limited sense of self. He describes near-death experiences where people report seeing a radiant light and experiencing profound peace. And he sees these as like glimpses into this luminous splendor of the unmanifested.
So it's about letting go of our attachments, our fears, our limiting beliefs. Essentially everything that prevents us from experiencing our true nature.
Exactly. And this brings us to another key concept that might initially feel a bit paradoxical. Surrender.
I have to admit, the word surrender always makes me think of like giving up or admitting defeat. It doesn't exactly sound empowering.
I totally get that. There's definitely resistance to that word, but Tolle is very clear that surrender is not about passivity or weakness. It's about aligning with the source energy of being, letting go of our resistance to what is, and allowing like a higher intelligence to work through us.
So it's more about acceptance than resignation.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're not in control of everything, that life unfolds according to this wisdom that's beyond our limited understanding. And when we surrender to this wisdom, we open ourselves up to this deeper flow of energy and guidance.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could be powerful. But how does surrender actually play out in our lives? Can you give me like an example?
Yeah, imagine you're facing this really challenging situation at work. Maybe you've been passed over for a promotion.
Right.
Or you're dealing with a difficult colleague. The ego's natural reaction is to like resist this situation.
Right.
To fight against it, to try to control it.
Right. I'd probably feel resentful and start like strategizing how to get what I want.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Tolle would argue that this resistance, that's what actually creates suffering. Instead, he suggests like surrendering to the situation, accepting it as it is, and then taking action from this place of clarity and presence.
So it's not about like passively accepting whatever happens, but about responding consciously rather than reacting from a place of ego.
Precisely. Tolle calls this surrendered action.
Okay.
It's about acting in alignment with the present moment, without the baggage of past resentments or anxieties about the future.
That makes a lot of sense. But what about these really tough situations? The ones that like feel truly overwhelming, like a serious illness or the loss of a loved one. Can surrender really help in those circumstances?
Tolle believes that these, what he calls limit situations, they actually hold the potential for profound transformation. He shares these examples of people facing like extreme adversity, even those on death row, who find this deep sense of peace and even joy in their final hours.
That's incredible. But like, how is that even possible? How can someone surrender to such a difficult situation?
It's not about denying the pain or pretending that everything is okay. It's about, accepting what is without resistance and allowing ourselves to be fully present with the experience, however challenging it might be.
So instead of getting caught up in the story that we create around the pain, we can simply allow ourselves to like feel it fully without judgment.
Exactly. And Tolle argues that in that space of pure awareness, the pain can actually be transmuted into something deeper. This profound connection to the present moment and to the essence of who we are. He calls it like alchemical transmutation. Turn the lead of suffering into the gold of spiritual awakening.
I love that analogy. It suggests that even the most difficult experiences can be transformative if we approach them with the right attitude.
Right.
But how does this concept of surrender play out in our everyday relationships?
That's where it gets really interesting. Tolle believes that surrender can revolutionize our relationships by enabling us to accept others as they are, rather than trying to change them to fit our expectations.
So instead of like trying to force our partner into this particular role, we can simply appreciate them for who they are.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this acceptance, it doesn't mean condoning bad behavior or ignoring our own needs. It's about recognizing that our partner, they're on their own journey.
Right.
With their own like unique set of challenges and triumphs.
But doesn't that lead to like a lot of frustration? What if their behavior is actually causing us pain?
Tolle would say that the frustration comes from our resistance to what is. Instead of trying to control our partner, we can focus on understanding their perspective, communicating our needs clearly, and setting healthy boundaries.
So it's about finding that balance between acceptance and assertive communication.
Exactly. And Tolle emphasizes that true surrender, it empowers us to act with clarity and integrity. It's not about becoming a doormat. It's about responding to situations with wisdom and compassion, rather than reacting from this place of ego.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together, but I'm curious. How does Tolle differentiate between accepting someone's essence and accepting their behavior, especially if that behavior is hurtful?
Yeah, that's a great question. He's not advocating for tolerating abuse or mistreatment. What he's saying is that we can choose to see the divine spark within someone, even if their actions are out of alignment with that essence.
So it's like seeing the potential for good in everyone, even if they're not currently living up to that potential.
Yeah. Exactly. And this perspective allows us to approach relationships with more compassion and understanding, even when things are difficult.
That's such a powerful shift in perspective, and it sounds like it requires a lot of mindfulness and self-awareness.
It does. But the more we practice presence, the easier it becomes to see those egoic patterns, both in ourselves and in others.
We've been focusing a lot on romantic relationships, but I'm curious how these principles of surrender and presence, how they apply to other types of relationships, like friendships or family dynamics.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the same principles apply, whether it's a romantic partner, a friend, a family member, even a colleague. The invitation is to see beyond the ego, to connect with their essence, and approach the relationship from a place of presence and acceptance.
So it's about bringing that same level of awareness and intentionality to all of our interactions, regardless of the nature of the relationship.
Exactly. And this brings us to another fascinating aspect of Tolle's work, his insights into the dynamics of male-female relationships.
I know he has some strong opinions about that.
He does. And some of them, they might challenge conventional thinking. He acknowledges the historical imbalances between men and women.
Yeah.
And the ways in which, patriarchal societies have suppressed and undervalued the feminine.
So it's like he's acknowledging this collective wound that exists between the genders.
Precisely. And he even suggests that the spiritual awakening of humanity is intimately connected to the healing of the feminine principle.
Okay, can you elaborate on that a bit more?
He believes that the feminine qualities, things like intuition, receptivity, nurturing, connection to the earth, these have been kind of pushed aside in favor of more masculine values.
Right.
Like logic, dominance, and control.
Yeah.
And this imbalance, he argues, it has led to a disconnect from the source of life, resulting in violence, exploitation, and this deep sense of separation.
So he's saying that the healing of this rift between the masculine and the feminine, it's essential for the evolution of human consciousness as a whole.
Exactly. And this healing, it involves, both men and women embracing and integrating the feminine qualities within themselves. It's not about one gender being superior to the other, but about recognizing that these two principles, they're like complementary forces, both essential for wholeness and balance.
That's such a beautiful and hopeful vision. It's like we're being invited to move beyond the old paradigms of gender roles and embrace this more integrated and harmonious way of being.
Exactly. And Tolle emphasizes that this integration is essential not just for personal fulfillment, but for the healing of the planet as well.
I love how he connects the personal to the collective in this way. It's like he's saying that our individual journeys of awakening are inextricably linked to the evolution of humanity as a whole.
Precisely. And this brings us back to his core message, the transformative power of presence. By becoming present in this moment, we can transcend the limitations of the mind, access the deeper dimension of being, and contribute to the creation of a more conscious and compassionate world.
Wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive.
We have.
It's been an incredible journey of exploring these profound and often challenging ideas.
It has. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final question to ponder. What if we were to approach all our relationships, romantic or otherwise, from this place of surrendered presence? How might it transform our experience of love, connection, and intimacy?
That's a beautiful and powerful question to contemplate, and I think it's one that we can all continue to explore in our own lives.
Absolutely. And as we've seen in this deep dive, Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, it offers this really profound roadmap to spiritual awakening and a more fulfilling life. It's a journey of self-discovery, transformation, and ultimately of remembering who we truly are.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. It's been an incredible exploration.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you.
And until next time, keep exploring the power of the now.
Yeah, that is a really fascinating question to think about. If surrender can really be that powerful, how would it actually change the way we experience the world, especially in our relationships?
Well, we've been talking about how much emphasis Tolle puts on presence and acceptance in relationships, right? But he actually goes even deeper than that. He challenges the very way we view relationships in the first place.
Oh, okay.
He argues that we shouldn't look to our relationships as the source of our happiness.
That's an interesting perspective, because I think a lot of us, we go into relationships hoping that our partner will complete us or fulfill some unmet need that we have.
Exactly. And Tolle would say that this is a recipe for disappointment, even suffering. He believes that true happiness can only be found within ourselves, not through external sources.
So instead of seeking happiness from our partner, we should be cultivating happiness within ourselves. Precisely. And when we approach relationships from this place of inner fullness, they become less about getting our needs met and more about sharing our joy and supporting each other's growth.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But if we're not relying on our partner for happiness, then what is the purpose of relationships in Tolle's view?
He sees relationships as mirrors, reflecting back to us our own patterns of thinking and behavior. Instead of trying to change our partner, he suggests we use the relationship as an opportunity to become more conscious of ourselves, to see where we might be holding on to limiting beliefs or acting from a place of ego.
Oh, so it's like each relationship becomes this amazing opportunity for self-discovery and transformation.
Exactly. And this self-awareness is the key to transforming our relationships and creating a deeper level of connection. We're not trying to force our partner into a particular mold. We're simply learning and growing alongside them.
That sounds incredibly freeing, but what about those times when our partner's behavior is genuinely hurtful or harmful? Does surrender mean we just have to tolerate that?
That's a very important point to remember. Tolle is not advocating for passivity or for staying in relationships that are abusive or toxic. He's emphasizing the power of acceptance, but that doesn't mean accepting mistreatment.
So how do we reconcile those two things, accepting our partner as they are while also setting healthy boundaries?
It's a delicate dance, but a crucial one. Tolle encourages us to communicate our needs clearly and to disengage from situations or relationships that are no longer serving our highest good.
So it's about finding that balance between compassion and self-respect. We can recognize that our partner is on their own journey while also prioritizing our own well-being.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the importance of distinguishing between our partner's essence and their ego.
Right, can you remind me of the distinction there?
Sure. So their essence is their true nature, that pure consciousness that Tolle talks about, which is inherently loving and whole. Their ego, on the other hand, is that mind-made sense of self, which is often driven by fear, insecurity, and the need for control.
So when we're feeling hurt or frustrated by our partner's behavior, it's helpful to ask ourselves, am I reacting to their ego or to their essence?
Precisely. And if we can see through the layers of ego, we can connect with their true being and respond with compassion, even when their behavior is challenging. It doesn't mean excusing their actions, but it does allow us to approach the situation from a more understanding and less reactive place.
That's such a powerful shift in perspective, and it sounds like it requires a lot of mindfulness and self-awareness.
It does, but the more we practice presence, the easier it becomes to see those egoic patterns both in ourselves and in others.
We've been focusing a lot on romantic relationships, but I'm curious how these principles of surrender and presence apply to other types of relationships like friendships or family dynamics.
That's a great question. And I think the same principles apply, whether it's a romantic partner, a friend, a family member, or even a colleague. The invitation is to see beyond the ego, to connect with their essence, and to approach the relationship from a place of presence and acceptance.
So it's about bringing that same level of awareness and intentionality to all our interactions, regardless of the nature of the relationship.
Exactly. And this brings us to another really fascinating aspect of Tolle's work, his insights into the dynamics of male-female relationships.
I know he has some pretty strong opinions on that.
He does. And some of them might challenge conventional thinking. He acknowledges the historical imbalances between men and women and the ways in which patriarchal societies have suppressed and undervalued the feminine.
So it's like he's acknowledging this kind of collective wound that exists between the genders.
Precisely. And he even suggests that the spiritual awakening of humanity is intimately connected to the healing of the feminine principle.
Can you say more about that?
He believes that the feminine qualities of intuition, receptivity, nurturing, connection to the earth, these have been kind of pushed aside in favor of more masculine values like logic, dominance, and control. And this imbalance, he argues, has led to a disconnect from the source of life, resulting in violence, exploitation, and a deep sense of separation.
So he's saying that the healing of this rift between the masculine and feminine is essential for the evolution of human consciousness as a whole.
Exactly. And this healing involves both men and women embracing and integrating the feminine qualities within themselves. It's not about one gender being superior to the other, but about recognizing that these two principles are complementary forces, both essential for wholeness and balance.
That's such a beautiful and hopeful vision. It's like we're being invited to move beyond the old paradigms of gender roles and embrace a more integrated and harmonious way of being.
Exactly. And Tolle emphasizes that this integration is essential not just for personal fulfillment, but for the healing of the planet as well.
I love how he connects the personal to the collective in this way. It's like he's saying that our individual journeys of awakening are inextricably linked to the evolution of humanity as a whole.
Precisely. And this brings us back to his core message, the transformative power of presence. By becoming present in this moment, we can transcend the limitations of the mind, access the deeper dimension of being, and contribute to the creation of a more conscious and compassionate world.
Wow. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive.
We have.
It's been an incredible journey exploring these profound and often challenging ideas from The Power of Now.
It really has, and it's been a pleasure diving deep into this book with you.
Likewise, and to all our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into The Power of Now. Until next time, keep exploring the power of presence, and remember, you are not your mind.